Hello, welcome to part something or other, 5, in doing your Jewish genealogy, which is a little bit of a tongue twister I just discovered. Doing your Jewish genealogy. This episode is going to give you some advice about how to interview your elders to get information about the family. I'm not saying you don't know how to talk to your elders. I'm quite sure you do, and some of you may be my elder. But I'm really just getting into the kinds of questions that you can ask, sort of guiding questions that can give them a sense of, or give you a sense where you can actually get some information. Sometimes people don't know what they know or something like that. So I'm just going to give you some ideas about what questions to ask and a little bit of ideas about how to handle sort of sticky situations and stuff. Before I begin, yes, what I've done here is if you do the math, your oldest elders now will be in their 90s. So they would have been young adults in the 40s when people dressed thusly. So I am, in my other life, in this life, an avid collector of vintage and antique jewelry, and have avid interest in vintage style and fashion history, and had a blog about it for a long time. So I've been enjoying dressing the part for various videos that I've been making. So what I've done here is I've done not a glamour puss, big huge curls on my head 1940s look, but more of what an average person might have worn in the 1940s, like a real human being, as opposed to a supermodel or Betty Grable under the hot lights, and having had so many stylists that she doesn't even look like herself anymore. So that's what that's all about, and it was very fun to pull together. If you ever want to know more about vintage jewelry, I do have another channel that I'll try to remember to put the link in down below. Okay, so one of the first things I wanted to specify in this is that, again, as I said before, I'm primarily talking to those of you who are Western, live in the United States, Canada, Australia, etc., and are the descendants of, generally the descendants of refugees from, Jewish refugees from Eastern Europe around 1900, give or take, 20 years on either side. Refugees generally from the pogroms, probably you were told from Russia, although that's probably not quite true. The reason I'm specifying this right now is because the elders that you would be talking to, that I'm talking about right now, are elders within your own culture. So if you're American, these would be your American elders, or perhaps British or something. If you are lucky enough to find family in the old country, Eastern Europe, and also in Israel, having come from Eastern Europe, unfortunately, by this point, our families are they're different cultures now. These different branches of your family are from different cultures now, and also from vastly different experiences. There's going to be a lot of trauma history in your family who grew up in the Soviet Union, and or are actual Holocaust survivors. And yes, those can still be found. I found 2 in my family. Interviewing them and talking to them is a different story, and it's a whole different set of questions you're going to be asking them, a different approach, language barriers, cultural differences, etc. So I'm talking about interviewing elders closer to home. My husband gave me this absolutely appropriate cup for today's video. So my first advice, above and beyond all other advice about interviewing your elders or talking to your elders about your Jewish genealogy, is do it now. Do it yesterday. Do it quick. You don't know how much time they have left, and they don't know how much time they have left, and you also don't know how much time they have left in good health, or of sound mind. Sadly, I hate to say that, but interview them right away. Talk to them right away. In my case, the two closest elders I've talked to the most are my 97-year-old uncle. He's an interesting fellow, and a little bit interesting to try to talk to. His son has been very gracious in helping me with that. His son, my cousin. And then also a woman named Beverly, whom I actually found online in a group called Tracing the Tribe, which I'll talk about in another video. It's a very, very helpful group. We met each other online because I just put out a call saying I'm looking for thus and such family, and she remembered the last name because she knew my father. She was my my grandmother's sister's child, so she's a cousin once removed or something. Beverly was in her late 80s, I think, when I found her. And I talked to her, and she was incredibly generous with information and time, and just her great sense of humor and her quick wit, quick mind. And not very long after I found her, though, she had a bad fall, and she, she did end up in a home, and then she did pass. And I'm so grateful I found her, not only because of the information I got from her, which was a lot, but also because I really liked her. I was smitten. I just thought she was just the coolest woman. And I just, to give you a sense of how old your elders in this case are, when I found her, was still in perimenopause, and I'm 54 now. And I asked her, because she's my family member, she's the daughter, she's my grandma's niece, right? I said, can you tell me anything about how your menopause went? And, she goes, oh, my dear, that's such a long time ago. I don't remember that. And here I was thinking, oh, I'm so old now, I'm in perimenopause. So, it gives you some really amazing perspective. Another thing that I didn't actually put in my notes, but that I should say, is that, all her life she had been wanting to know what happened to our family in the Holocaust. She was alive and, fully cognizant when the Holocaust happened. And so, of course, this gave her another reason for being very, very happy to talk to me. And I have to say that I felt that I failed her. I said, I'm going to find out. And all I was able to find out at that point was, I know that some of us survived. This was on a specific family branch. I can tell you I know some of us survived, and that's all I know so far. And she was over the moon. She was so happy. I felt I'd failed her. I had so little information, and that was the most information she'd had her whole life. So, it's a two-way, it's not just a give and give on their part, or a take and take on somebody's part. It is a give and take. I wanted to also mention, if you are the oldest in your generation, if you don't have any elders left, and I'm sure some of you watching this, that's the case with you, ask yourself these same questions that I'm telling other people to ask their elders. You probably know a lot more than you realize, and if you sort of do some brainstorming, you think about what you know and you jot it all down, you might be quite surprised by how much you know. And then the other thing to do is, if you have any living relatives who are the same age as you, obviously sit down with them if you're able, and talk things through with them and see what you can come up with together. And then finally, if you have anyone your age who is not an actual relative, but you grew up with and around, and maybe they went to the same synagogue when you were a child or something like that. Talk to them too. See what they know. Sometimes people on the outside noticed something that you actually didn't know about your own family or just were aware of somehow, etc. One of the other things I want to say is record everything. That doesn't necessarily have to mean, an auditory recording or a video recording, although that's easy to do nowadays and is a great thing to do. But it can, you can also be jotting down notes, although that's very difficult to do while you're trying to be respectfully listening. Jotting down notes, your eyes are immediately off them and stuff. But definitely keep a record and keep it immediately. Every single thing you think you're going to remember, no problem. You will forget. Trust me. You're definitely going to forget. So keep records of everything and keep in your head, know where you left your records also, whether where on your computer or where in a file, because that can also give some problems. So now, it is true that your elders, it'll be interesting to know how much your elders know. They may not know as much as you would like. Most of the people who knew things maybe a little bit more firsthand and then kept quiet about it because they didn't want those, their children, their grandchildren, etc., to suffer the pain of knowing. Most of those people have now passed. So in my case, my great-grandfather knew what had happened to the family during the Holocaust and didn't tell anyone. So when I asked his son, my uncle, anything about the old country, like what happened in the Holocaust, he didn't know because his father didn't tell him, and my family believed we'd lost nobody in the Holocaust, which obviously wasn't true, but we didn't realize that. Most of the elders nowadays, if you're able to put them at their ease, whether you know them already or have just found them, if you're able to put them at their ease, by being a nice person to them and letting them know you value them as a human being and not just a repository of information. Most of them are pretty comfortable talking now, and again, that's in our culture. There's other issues with other cultures. But do be aware that, unfortunately they might not know a whole lot, but what they will know, and what will help you in the long run with doing other genealogy, like going further back, is they will know a lot about the family here in the new country. And the more you know about the family in the new country, the easier it's going to be for you to then go backwards in time and figure out where your family came from, how they got here, and then, and here's the big thing, find who the extended family were in the old country who didn't come here. So even if they seem like they don't know, they don't know anything, or they know very little about the old country, if they just say, oh, we're from Russia, which again, not actually the case, but that's another video. I actually did talk about it in another one of my videos, in my video about what is an Ashkenazi Jew. I talked about where we're actually from, which is the Pale of Settlement. Generally, Eastern European Jews are from the Pale of Settlement, not Russia proper. But even if that's all they know, they'll know a lot about here, the people here, including their elders. So you're getting further and further back at that point. But, do be aware that, in the end, if there's something they just don't want to talk about, then they just don't want to talk about it. Just let them not talk about it. And, it might be disappointing. It might be sad. I found that to be somewhat the case with my uncle. By the way, I've talked to many, many other elders, but these are like the two, when I mentioned my uncle and Beverly, these were the two that are sort of the most closely related to me. It's just they're some of the very first ones I talked to. And then as I went on, I found more and more. This advice applies to most of those people, but I'll keep referencing Beverly, especially because she was the very first one I found. And it was just incredibly rewarding. And through her, I found so many more, including younger people as well. Beverly, luckily, was just an open book. She was very happy to talk about just about everything. My uncle, not as much. If they don't want to, they don't want to, right? They're human beings. Be respectful. And remember, too, that your goal in doing your Jewish genealogy or any genealogy is learning about your family. So simply talking to an elder, that's your family. You're learning about your family by getting to know that person as a person. That's your family. So, sometimes the impulse, especially if you find a new family member, is just pump them for information to get to the next family member. But getting to know them is, that's the whole point, isn't it? In part. So, again, don't treat them as just repositories of information, but treat them as, wow, I found a family member. I'm going to learn more about a family member. And, often through talking to them, you find yourself understanding you're closer to like your parents or something a lot better than you did. Like, oh my God, I learned so much about what my grandmother had gone through, especially that helped me understand who she became, and then helped me understand my father's resentments towards her, and then why he didn't like what he saw in me that reminded him of her, like my interest in fashion, for example. Like suddenly all these pieces of puzzles just went click, 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 click. So, you're not just doing sort of a family tree, you're also sort of putting together the psychology of a clan. Your family, your wider family, you become almost like a clan, right? Let's see, where was I? Oh, and do be, I found one elder in my family. I found him actually through a DNA match, which by the way is not that common. DNA matches for Ashkenazi Jews are quite difficult, and I do talk about that in my video about Ashkenazi Jews. But this man I did find through a DNA match, which was amazing. And he really wanted to talk about how hot his second wife was. And he sent me like this little sort of self-published little sort of pamphlet-y book about his life story, and it was full of pictures of this woman in a bathing suit, and I was just like, okay, that's what he's about, like, it was sweet. I felt bad for his first wife, obviously, but they're gonna have quirks, and they're gonna be annoying, just like at times, or lovely at times, just like anybody else. Which also reminds me, if you have a family member that is an elder who might have a fair bit of information, sorry if you can hear the scraping, this is, this makes it easier, I'm disabled and it's hard for me to move and lift things, so I can slide it. Anyway, sorry, if you have a family member that is an elder, with whom you do not get along, and they're quite frankly not very kind to you, they're not very nice people in general, make up your own decisions about whether or not it's worth it to you to talk to them. You don't have to talk, like if you've been estranged from a family member for 30 years or something, don't think carefully before reaching out simply to get information from them. For one thing, it might not be worth it. It might be too painful for you or for them, depending on the situation. But also, if part of why you cut off contact with them is because they're kind of manipulative or something, they're going to use your desire for information to manipulate you. So, make some choices about what your priorities are. Another thing I wanted to say is that you might find, if you're lucky or having difficulty, that there might be someone in your family who can be a little bit of a buffer between you and the elder that you're trying to talk to. For example, if there's a family, an elder who is perfectly friendly, but they're not really understanding what it is you're looking for, like why you want to know all of this. Sometimes there's someone who's closer to them in the family who's better at explaining these things to them because they know them better, like maybe their son or their daughter or grandchild or something like that. So having a buffer is can be helpful as well. Another thing to remember as you're doing this is, obviously you want to be able to put into your family tree names, birthdays, death days, marriages, children, all this kind of thing, obviously. But if you're anything like me, that's just kind of the framework. What you really want to know is the family stories. Who was this person? What were their interests? What did they do for a career? What were their triumphs? What were their tragedies? So whenever you can collect family stories as well as just facts and bits of sort of, birthday information and stuff, which is vitally important. But whenever you can get those extras, let them ramble. Let the person telling you the stories, let them ramble, let them tell you side stories. And, you never know. Sometimes those things actually lead to really important things. I mean, what you're doing here, sometimes you're getting full pieces of information or getting the whole story about one family branch or something like this. But you also are collecting puzzle pieces and setting them aside for later, because although they might not really seem that important right now, or they might just seem like, you don't really get what they are about, you might find that, in 5 months you find this other relative here who has another piece of the puzzle, and suddenly you put the two pieces together and this whole story opens up. One of my favorite stories, interestingly, I found a family branch who did stay in Lithuania, and in fact in this case Russia, because this particular family branch were photographers, and two of them, and by two of them I really mean two families, were official photographers to the Tsars' families. 3 of the Tsars, the last 3 Tsars, they photographed their families in an official capacity. I know, amazing, right? And as such had special permission as Jews to live in Russia. So that was the one branch that actually did live in Russia. Anyway, I tracked down what I thought was probably a family branch in South Africa, but I wasn't totally sure. And I was communicating with this one woman who's the same age as me, and I said, this is going to sound really, really strange, but are there any family stories about photographers, including even photographers to the Tsar? And she wrote back to me and she said, oh my God, you mean that's true? All her life she'd heard stories about this and she didn't believe them. None of the younger generations believed that what their elders were telling them. They thought it was exaggeration or trying to make the family seem important. And then once she learned that, yeah, this was true, your family did photograph the royals professionally all the time, she went through her old boxes of photographs, and there were a lot of interesting stories found in those photographs. So, you get one piece of a puzzle here and one piece over here, and you don't, until you get the chance to put them together, and then you might get those two pieces at very different times. Hang on to them, which, goes back to record everything, not just the stuff you think is important, record everything. By the way, I'm going to do a video down the road about photographs, how to make sense of old photographs. Many elders have boxes of photographs. They don't even know who half the people in them are or where they were taken or things like that. I mean, think about your own boxes of photographs. You probably don't know who everyone is in them. So I'll talk to you about that in another video. This is tea, by the way. My husband has turned me into a cultured person, and now I drink tea instead of coffee. Well, okay, I'll also drink coffee because, it's coffee. One of the things I've noticed with talking to any family members is they often will need a little bit of prodding. They don't realize what they know, or they don't remember to tell you things, and like you'll have like now been in contact with them for a year, and suddenly, well, here's an example. I mentioned that I discovered several in my family, in one branch of my family. We're quite muscular and we're quite athletic in our builds, and a lot of us are into some form of sport that requires a lot of ability to build muscle. And this cousin I'd been in touch with for a while goes, "Oh yeah, my uncle was Mr. America 1950." I was like, "And you never told me this? What are you talking about?" So, they don't always realize what they haven't told you yet, or something like this. So, or they might not realize it's relevant or something. So, do prod and ask, really specific questions, to make sure that you're getting the whole story. And even so, things are going to just not get to you, and you'll find out way later and go, why did they tell me this, And also, obviously understand that they might get some things wrong. They might have the incorrect information, or they're remembering it incorrectly. Obviously don't get annoyed with them about that. Just think about your own, go back and think about all the cousins you had when you were a kid, and try to tell me exactly which one belongs to which aunt and which uncle, and is this aunt your biological aunt or your aunt by marriage? You're not going to be able to keep all that straight in your head, and neither can they. And, they're 90 now or something, right? Beverly, she was so good. She told me all these family branches and exactly who was who and who was married to who and who had these kids. And there was one family branch I could not figure out which. Oh, another point. Do your research. They will tell you all of this stuff, but then double check everything as much as you possibly can by looking at other kinds of documentation like census forms and stuff. And I'll get into that stuff later as well. But anyway, so I was double checking everything, and everything was matching up with the stuff that I was managing to find online because of her help. But there was this one family branch that wasn't. And then what we realized is that she'd switched around she had an aunt and uncle couple, which one was her uncle by marriage, or her relative by marriage, and which one was her relative by blood, and then who had which last name. So it was like the woman had the last name, not the man, or something like that. And it was just maddening. I couldn't figure it out. And then I finally did, and I got back to her, and she was quite tickled that she'd made this mistake and that I was able to fix it. And she was, happy to fix it in her own mind. Now, one of the other things that I want to say is that, and I'm going to be doing a video, perhaps my next video will be about the very basics of building a family tree. I'm going to show you how to do it on Ancestry, but which is a genealogy site online, which is, you do have to pay, but there are other ones where you don't have to pay. Start entering this information into the family tree as quickly as you can. It's very helpful to look at this stuff visually. I'm a very text-based person. My husband makes charts for a living, and I look at the charts and it's kind of glaze over, and I'm like, can you just write it down, please? Which is it's sort of weird because, like, he makes charts for a living and he married an English lit instructor. This is like, but when it comes to the family, putting it down visually helps a lot. However, if you don't know something for sure yet, if there's any question at all, somehow make note of that so that you don't later go back and think that something is a fact that was just a hypothesis about, who so-and-so's father was or whatever. And B, anyone else who's using your family tree to build their own tree doesn't copy the same incorrect information. I've seen that so many times online. Or one person makes a mistake and then everyone else makes the same mistake on their family tree. I have one family branch that descends from someone named Michael Yasvoin, and they have all picked the wrong, one person picked the wrong Michael Yasvoin as their ancestor, and then everyone else after that just copied that and pasted it into their own family tree. So there's all these incorrect family trees online. I am still trying to figure out who the correct Michael was, but I have some ideas. That's my cat Ketzel, which there he is, means kitten in Yiddish. Let's see. Now, one of the things I found that when you're talking to your elders, ask them about the oldest people they can remember. Get them on the family tree. And one of the things you're going to want to do first is, in what will be much easier to do, is trace downwards from there. So let's say you know about this family, but now you find out that your great-grandma had a sister, and then you're going to learn all about those kids. So those are your cousins. That's going to be easier than when you start going backwards and tracing back to the old country. So start with going downwards, and then also you'll find more living people that you can contact to get information from. It'll help get you practiced before you start going backwards, because that gets kind of hard. This brings me to another question. Another question you would want to ask your elders. When you're asking for names of family members, also ask for nicknames, Hebrew names, Yiddish names. You may or may not be able to get those depending on what they do and don't know, but most of them will know a Yiddish nickname if you're going far enough back. So I have my great-grandfather, one of my great-grandfathers, when he came to America, he called himself Simon. But I learned quickly, nobody ever called him Simon. He was Shia. He was always and forever Shia. Stuff like that is really helpful because records are kept in lots of different names. It's maddening. Someone's nickname, someone's Yiddish name, someone's Hebrew name, someone's English name, someone's other nickname. So as much as possible, get their official names and find out whatever their nicknames were as well. And I just put them all on the family tree, even if it makes it look like they had this incredibly long name. Just put them all there. Even put some on where you think maybe that was their nickname. Just do it. That's what I do anyway. Obviously, you want to know birth dates. That goes without saying. The closer, the more specific the birth date, the more helpful that is. And the older you get with, the further back, the harder it's going to be to actually know what someone's birthday was. But even if you don't know the exact birth date, plug in an approximation of what year you think they may have been born in. So if you know that they had their first kid in 1925, say, there's a good guess that they themselves were born in about 1900, putting them at 25 when they had their first kid. So just like broad generalizations if you can. But ask them if they know about birth dates. If they don't remember birth dates, maybe they remember their astrological sign. You never know. Obviously ask where they lived. You'll often get, if it was a closer family member, you'll get a lot of detailed information, and then they moved here, and then they moved here, and all of that can be helpful. What job did they have? You might have noticed amongst Jews that especially the mamalas, they have a little bit of a tendency to brag about their relatives with really good jobs, but you want to know all their jobs. So, they'll tell you about the doctor and the dentist, but you also want to know about, the manual laborer or whatever. You want to know both because it helps you get more information about them, like maybe if you know what their job was, that might help you know where they were living or something, but also because they're family and you just want to know about them, right? So, medical crises. I can't, I can't stress this enough for Jews. I'm feeling emotional right now. I nearly died 5 years ago from gallbladder, a diseased gallbladder. And I'd been sick from it for a long time. And my doctors have been telling the usual, it's stress, you have irritable bowel syndrome or whatever. Until I was rushed into the emergency room with just really painful pancreatitis. I've since had 5 women who have had children tell me that pancreatitis hurt worse than giving birth. Worse than, not the same as, worse than giving birth. And oh my God, I believe it. And then I was in the hospital. This was during the COVID lockdown, so only emergency patients were let in. I was in the hospital for a week. They took my gallbladder out, and I felt so much better. I mean, lots of pain, but so much better. Anyway, guess what runs in my family? Well, you know where this is going, right? But I didn't know. I only mentioned it. I had started a Facebook group of family that I had found, and I mentioned this to them, and I've lost count of how many other members of my family have also been rushed to the hospital for an emergency gallbladder removal. So many in Russia, in America, in Australia, in England, and we didn't know each other. So how could we know this runs in the family? And I've got to ask myself, how many of us died not knowing, died because of this? So I cannot stress enough, ask about medical information. It was very emotional realizing that the events of the 19th and 20th century that tore Jewish families apart almost killed me. That was intense. But also, you just want to know, like if there was a family member in my family who lost a leg, and although that doesn't help me trace down any more information about him or anyone else, it's just, that's a thing you want to know about someone's life, right? So ask about medical information. I found one family member who's actually, now that he's retired, learning more genetic information about Jews is the work he's now doing for just these reasons that I'm talking about, because so much information was lost. Obviously, you want to know who married whom, who had what children, what those children's names were, anything people know about those children and those children's children, etc., etc. If you don't have exact dates, try to get approximate dates for everything. If you don't have a name, just put in a question mark, just as much as you can possibly get. Death dates are really, really helpful, because as soon as someone has died, at least in America, and I believe in Canada, and in many countries, information about them becomes public, or a lot of information about them becomes public. So suddenly, it's a lot easier to do searches on them. So if you find out, about these 2 different relatives, and one is dead and one is alive, to put it crassly, research the dead one first. You're going to get way more information, and it's going to be really helpful. If you can find out where they're buried, that's buried. I don't know, tomato. I'm scratching Ketzel's head because he just begged. That'll be helpful. If you find out where they're buried, sometimes their family's buried around them, so then you can get more genealogical information. But also with Jews, if you find a photo of the headstone, or if your elder has a photo of the headstone. As many of you know, the father's name of the person who died is usually on the headstone. You'll get both the Hebrew name of the person who died and the Hebrew name of the father of the person who died. And I can't tell you how many times that has been enough for me to go, okay, so these two people are siblings because they both have the same father. It's on their headstone. And there are quick and easy ways to get translations if you don't read Hebrew. Obviously you want to know whatever family stories they do have about the old country. Often they don't know very much. Often they think that we're just from Russia somewhere. But, you know, even if you know that some parts of the story just can't possibly be correct, just keep asking them to tell you whatever they do know. Why did the family come here? When did they come here? Where did they first go? Where did they come from? Did they have any family back home? Whatever they do know, or think they know, is a start. It might not all be correct, but keep track of it. Keep it as clues. They're clues. You're basically solving mysteries here, and if you're Jewish, they're difficult mysteries. It's not an easy thing to do the genealogy, but it makes you feel really smart when you get something right. Now they're all, not all, but many of them are going to tell you that the family changed their name at Ellis Island. I've talked about that in another video. That's not actually true. They weren't allowed to change their names at Ellis Island, but some of them did change their names afterwards or a little bit later. Sorry, I mean, they changed their names a little bit later once they were here. So, one of the big things that families will often do is they'll drop the regionalized endings on their name. So I have a family branch that now is Rogoff, but in the old country it was Rogovsky with a V and not an F, Rogovsky. And then some people in the family changed it when they moved here to Rogoff. Some people changed it to Rogau with a W. I have another family branch that was Bloomin in the old country, and they changed it to Bloom once they got here. But one spells it with an E, and one group spells it without an E. That kind of thing can sort of broaden your search for family, because you know that there are, say, 3 different possible last names rather than just one possible last name. I've talked in another video about staying open to wildly varying spellings of names. Another thing too, and this I may do a whole video about this, I don't know, but you know, I just said that some of these endings are regional. So say the ski ending, so Rogowski, often points to Poland, that maybe your family was in Poland at some point. Whereas an off ending suggests that maybe they were actually in Russia at some point, or I think Ukraine sometimes took on these off endings. So sometimes as you're sort of moving forward, you start learning little bits of things like that can also help you make some guesses about where you might be able to find your family in the old country. I keep calling it the old country. I don't know why, it sounds cute. The old country. Do ask your family about religion, of course. I mean, for one thing, it's just really interesting. I mean, how religious was your family? I had always assumed that all Eastern European Jews were very religious. I was really, really wrong about that. My family was, by the standards of the day, fairly secular. Yes, they still almost 99% of the time Jews married Jews. They did observe Shabbat. They kept kosher, which nowadays that in itself is fairly religious. But at the time it wasn't. The women weren't wearing, the men and women, neither were wearing head coverings on the regular. They weren't even going to synagogue regularly, stuff like that. I had no idea. So they were quite secular. I'd also assumed that, which is another topic, that they were not that well educated. And my great-grandfather was a scribe, which I'm not even sure what that is, but I think I have some ideas, though. I think I know. Anyway, so ask about that with the family that, that they do know about, that your elders do know about. And, you'll find that, as you're looking for family, you're going to find all kinds of things like, you're going to find everything from, say, an ultra-Orthodox family branch. I think I have 2 of those. To, someone who's now, gung-ho Christian, and is like, say, 1/8 Jewish at this point. So that's interesting. And you just be aware of that. The less in contact with their Jewishness they are, the less they're going to understand about Jewish culture, and they're going to have trouble answering some of your questions because they just won't understand the questions. That, however, isn't that common when you're talking to the elders. They're generally still fairly Jewish-ish, if you know what I mean. They kind of know a fair bit about Jewish culture and religion and stuff like that. But also, if you find out what synagogue maybe they were going to or something, sometimes synagogues will have a lot of information. Bizarrely, when I lived in Queens, very briefly, in Astoria, Queens, I lived across the street from the synagogue where my uncle and my father were little kids in the 1930s. And there were people there who remembered them. This was 1999. Anyway, my point there is that the synagogue was a source of information about my family. In that case, I didn't really need it because that was close family, but synagogues can be helpful. And plus, like I say, you just want to know, what was my family like in the past? What are they like now? Another really sad thing you're going to hear about, the further back you go, the more you're going to hear about early death, young death. I learned that my Uncle Charles, my grandmother's brother, died in the 1918 influenza epidemic. And that left a swath of grief all the way down the line in the family. And he left behind a young widow with one small child. These are things that, you obviously want to know about that kind of thing in the family. Then you know that she probably will have remarried, so you might want to track down the children of the second husband to learn all about the one child of the first husband, etc., etc. And yeah, I mean, you're going to hear a lot about babies dying, young people dying. It got better as soon as birth rates went down, as in birth control became available, which was around 1900, to married couples only, though. But as soon as birth rates went down, so did death rates in children. But you are going to find them, and you're going to find older people dying younger. They just did, So someone whose grandpa dies at 60, and that's kind of normal. And then it's hard to see all of that. It hurts. You find yourself emotionally engaged with these people who are long gone. Obviously, you want to know about divorces, remarriages. That's important. Now, here's one you may come across sometimes, and that is families disowning family members. One of the biggest reasons is if they married someone who wasn't Jewish. And then you might find out but actually all the kids were secretly talking to each other, secretly in contact. It's just all these like family secrets, right? So disowned family groups is another interesting way that family groups can be lost. I found this on at least in one case someone married a Christian, and in another case someone had an affair with, I think, his wife's sister or something, and they were banished or something. So I mean, it's not funny, but it's, yeah. Let's see. So what I'm sort of getting at here is you're going to want to know about family scandals if your elders are willing to tell you. And a lot of times they are, because everyone whose reputations they were protecting, they're all gone now. So they feel that they can talk about it. But do keep in mind that just because it's a long time ago for you, this is still within this person's lifetime, and they watched the fallout of this, and they suffered the pain from whatever this family scandal was. So, do be sensitive about how much they do and don't want to tell you, but often they will tell you. Suicides is one that comes up. I learned about one family member who killed himself by jumping off of a tenement building in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which was, the Jewish neighborhood. I mean, my God. Institutionalized children. Sorry, I just want to go back to the suicide. That man was the product of first cousins marrying. You're going to come across family scandals where first cousins married, and then sometimes their sets of first cousins kept marrying. You're going to find birth defects. I found that a couple of times in the family. In the case of this boy who jumped off young man who jumped off the roof, the family belief is that's he always had something a little bit off because he was too inbred. That's a hell of a family scandal, and it was not the first time I had come across children being a little bit off because of that. It's icky. You're not going to enjoy some of the things you learn. Which brings me to another one. I found at least 2 children who were institutionalized because they were disabled in a time when that was just what you did with disabled family. Not because you didn't love them or because you wanted them to be a secret, although sometimes that was true, but because there were absolutely no resources available for them, for the families, if they wanted to keep their children at home, their disabled children at home. This hits me hard because I am disabled, right? But the only place the children would get the support they needed, at least in theory, was if they were institutionalized. So that's another one I've found, and sometimes families don't want to talk about that. So when you're asking them, then you'll go, well, wait a minute, I just found this other person. What about this person? Oh, well, and it's going to take you a little bit of work to figure it out sometimes. Affairs. Obviously, one of the biggest reasons you're going to want to know about affairs in the family, aside from it just lets you know about the family, is if there were children born from these affairs. He had at least 3 wives, children by at least 3 wives, without ever having divorced anyone. He abandoned at least 2 families, but there's a possibility there were 5 wives and 5 sets of children, and therefore 4 wives and 4 sets of children abandoned. He is a juggernaut in my family tree, and he managed to, and he traveled quite a bit. He started out in Lithuania and England, New York, other places in the United States, South Africa. So he left one hell of a wake of pain behind him that to this day reverberates in some pretty serious family problems. And this guy was a young man in 1900, and the pain, what is it now, to 2025. But you do want to know about that, right? I mean, you want to know these stories, and you want to track down the descendants, and, are they okay? What's going on, So, if you're doing your genealogy for just sunshine and light, don't do it. Just don't. But if you're doing the genealogy to learn and to know what you come from, then absolutely do it. And of course you're going to find joy as well. Early pregnancies, and what I mean by early pregnancies is, did these guys get married like really soon before their child was born? I mean, in the end, it's not really a big deal if they married a little, the baby was born a little too soon. But sometimes it does add a little information, like why they were never seeming very happy as a couple because they didn't really want to be married or something. I've actually found only a couple of examples of that in my family tree, but I have found it. One ended up being a very happy marriage, one did not. But, something to look at. Adoptions is another thing you want to know about. Sometimes someone you think should be a DNA match to you and they're not. You need to take a look at whether or not there was an adoption. And again, this is, these are the kinds of things your elders will know, and sometimes the younger generations just don't know. So, you find let's say you got your hands on a family photo and you're just like, who's this? They're adopted, So, and, just as an aside, please treat the adopted family as family. Don't sort of go, well, I don't care about you because you're not blood, or, I'm not going to put you on the family tree or something. Oh, and going back to first cousin marriages, that is the kind of thing that your elders will tell you and somebody else might not. And they are a mess to try to put clearly on your family tree. I have not even figured out how to do it clearly yet. So, but yeah, anyway. They're going to know scandals. Like right now I'm doing a whole list of scandals that you want to find out about. Legal actions against someone in your family, or legal actions by them against someone in your family, someone getting sued. Not only will your elders, especially if they like to gossip, oh my God, you're so lucky if you find a gossiper. They're the best. They'll enjoy telling you these old stories about their uncle so-and-so or whatever. These are also things that you can find in newspapers, old newspapers. And, legal documents, they're boring as hell, but if you find them, they always have a ton of information in them, like what was their address, what was their phone number, what was their full name, how old were they, what's their birthday. These things are great. They're landmines for you. So if you find out there was a legal action about so-and-so, I'm going to go see if I can find this information, right? Even if you don't really care about the legal action itself. Prison time. Now, I'm happy to say I have not discovered any of that except family in Russia who are imprisoned for, trumped up reasons under the Tsars, under the Soviets, under Putin, etc. But that's totally different. But again, something you might want to know. Drug addiction, another huge family scandal that your elders will know about a lot of time. Alcoholism, and may tell you about. And is, in my opinion, a health history thing you might want to know about if that runs in your family. It's probably something you should know. And I just thought of another one: infertility. Endometriosis also runs in my family, which I did have. Happily, I'm in menopause, so I'm done with that. But first of all, it's very painful, and second of all, it can lead to infertility. I didn't want children, so I don't know if I was infertile, but I know some of my cousins who did want children couldn't have them. So, infertility, your elder says someone in your family was infertile. Does that help you with building the tree? Maybe. But it's just information. Like, if you know that your great aunt so-and-so had 5 miscarriages and her heart was heavy with that, you know something now that, I don't know. It's just, that's what you're doing this for, isn't it? To know your family, good and bad. Okay, as I just said, you want to find the elders who are into gossip in the family. Rumors. Ask them to tell you rumors. And this isn't just for elders. This is for anyone in the family willing to tell you rumors. Tell them, say, look, I understand this is just a rumor. I know you don't know if it's true, but rumors can lead to really useful information sometimes. So please tell me any rumors that you know. Some of them are, there's not anything scandalous or negative about them. They just don't know if they're true or not. So it's not even that they're gossiping, it's just they just aren't sure. They're like, I heard once my grandma said this, but I'm not sure. Sometimes it can be so helpful, you have no idea. And sometimes it's just fun. And sometimes it doesn't go anywhere. You just never know. But definitely don't dismiss anything they say just because they say, I'm not sure. Just keep it in mind, and then maybe it will be really, really helpful. Which also brings me to another point. If you have someone in the family, an elder, who asks you not to tell anyone about things, something, respect that. And sometimes it's really, really hard. I cannot tell you how many people in my family, this big extended family I've found, have told me, unfortunately, it's usually the painful family secrets. I've become this sort of confessor, so to speak. I found a woman who was, now this is European family, but a woman who was born right after the Holocaust, born in a displaced persons camp, a relative of mine, whose parents obviously had both survived the Holocaust, and they told her everything. Everything. Some families said nothing. They told her everything about their experiences in the Holocaust. And it's weighed heavily on her whole life, I'm sure. And she has told me things that they are so painful to carry. And I would like to share them with the family because I think we all deserve to know. And I think that if we carried these tragedies together, they'd be a little easier to bear. But she doesn't want me to, and so I'm not going to. Now, what I'll do when she passes, I don't know, but that's a long way off, and so I'm not going to, even think about that. So, if they say, I'll only tell you this if you'll keep it a secret, still write it down for yourself. But don't be putting it somewhere where everyone can see it. And by the way, on family trees that are online, anything you write down about family who is still alive, nobody else can see. So that's always secret right off the bat. Speaking of rumors, I think something that is really important, mystery family visits, mystery relatives, mystery telephone calls that your elders remember from way back when they were kids. Ask about those. Excuse me, my throat's going dry. As some of you know, I have to lift like this because of my back injury. It's very heavy for me. There are a lot of times in families, especially Jewish families, where they'll get one letter, say in 1935, and the family talks a lot about this letter and treasures the letter and won't tell the kids what it's about, and then it's never another letter. Or they'll get one phone call, or some guy, they'll go, oh, this is your uncle so-and-so, he's related to you through some weird way, and you never see him again. These are very likely whiffs of relatives from the old country. Sometimes they'll also be, say, Argentinian family, South African family, Israeli family. So family who got out before or after the Holocaust, but had to go to all these disparate places And by now, the families don't know anything about each other, these different branches. But your elder remembers once an uncle from, she thinks, South America somewhere, visited, and he had a funny accent, and she couldn't understand how she was. Oh my God, pay attention to those stories. Because, wow. And you know, sometimes they can be from the Soviet Union, and then they had to cut off contact because of God knows what Stalin was doing at that time. So, you know, here's an example. Sort of an example. I found a family member who's now in Russia, St. Petersburg, through, very circuitous route. I managed to find her. And of course she was like, how did you find me? She had heard that her great grandpa, had gone to America in 1934 on a trade skills sort of tour, Soviet tour, with tradesmen in America, and she'd heard that he visited American family there, and that's all she heard. And then a couple of years later, he was executed by Stalin for supposed treason. Don't know if there's a connection, who knows. It's all she'd heard from her elders. And then all these years later, she's in her 60s, I show up and go, I'm from America, I'm pretty sure I'm your cousin. These kinds of things are just, you know, kind of mind-blowing. I had another one that was like that as well. Oh, yeah. This one's so emotional. I found a living Holocaust survivor in my family in Israel. And his name was Itzhak Yasvin. And he said to me, I had heard that I had an uncle, an American uncle, who had my same name, Itzhak Yasvin. And I said, that's my great-grandpa. I got goosebumps telling you that story, all over goosebumps. This is what I mean by these little whiffs of family stories, where it's connections between the family branches that were torn apart well over a century ago now. I still have goosebumps. Can you see? Goosebumps. Another time when you might get some of these whiffs of old country information is family who did military service in World War I and especially World War II. They may have had a chance to make contact with Old World family at that time as well. So see if you can hear anything about that from your elders as well. And then finally, and this is, I'm sort of ending on a boring note, but make sure you know what languages they spoke at home. Probably Yiddish. Yiddish and English if you're American. But if there's some other language in there also, obviously this is going to be another clue to your family's story. If you found out they were speaking Lithuanian, obviously this is going to be really helpful to you. And actually that reminds me too, foods. Did their family have a real preference for foods from this country or that country that they would cook at home? That might be helpful as well. So as usual, oh my gosh, this video ended up being longer than I expected. But, and you know, I realized as I was going through this list that these are sort of pieces of information that you're going to be wanting to look for regardless, even if they're not from an elder, specifically from an elder. So you may feel like I just dumped like, oh my God, so many ideas on you. Just go through them one by one. And you're right. If this is what you're thinking, they're relevant whether or not you're getting the information from your elders or not. But this is stuff that you specifically want to talk to about your elders. So and I didn't think to mention this at first, do not ask them all of these questions all at once in one sitting. They will be pissed off with you. They're your elders. They're tired, for God's sakes. Give them a break. So pace yourself, even if you're super excited, pace yourself and help them pace themselves. As someone with a disability, I have a lot of an idea of what chronic fatigue feels like. And for the elderly, that's kind of their perpetual state, and probably aches and pains as well. So pacing is good. Okay, good luck. I would love to hear if you have any stories like this about talking to elders and what you've learned. And I'd be really excited to find out if any of the pieces of advice I gave you in here panned out and led to some new discoveries, including just that one of your elders is just really lovely and you're so glad you got to know them better or got to know them at all. All right, and this is actually 5:30 on Friday, so Shabbat Shalom.